that was crazy, right?
The script was
Wait a
screwed
minute,
from
how
the
much
start.
did this cost? They should get Doge to look into this movie. They spent $250 million making that movie.
Joe Rogan isn't the kind of guy to stay quiet when Hollywood melts down, and he definitely wasn't going to hold his tongue when it came to the case of Rachel Zegler. As one of the most outspoken voices in media, Rogan has built his platform by calling out absurdity, fake virtue signaling, and over-the-top celebrity meltdowns. And in Rachel's case, it was all of that, rolled into one.
They're prepaid for every hour that it is streamed online.
I'm so grateful for the things that I'm able to do.
I deserve prepaid for every hour that it is streamed online.
It started like every typical Joe Rogan conversation, laid back, casual, but sharp. He wasn't even trying to roast her at first. He was just commenting on the state of modern Hollywood. But once Rachel's name came up, the mood changed. You could see it in his eyes. He was baffled, maybe even frustrated by what he was witnessing. Here was someone who had been handed the keys to the kingdom, a golden ticket from Spielberg, a starring role in one of the most iconic Disney stories ever told, and somehow managed to fumble all of it, not because she lacked talent, not because she was mistreated, but because she couldn't stop talking.
Just hit the unfollow button. I don't need your business.
Babe, what business do you mean?
A lot of what you see with Zegler is really just a pretty common Gen Z mentality.
Not to add fuel to the Rachel Zegler Oscar fiasco, but why did they have these women, all Disney princesses, all stated as Disney princesses?
Rachel Zegler is the prime example of how you should never think that you're bigger than the project. The only excuse I can make for her is that she's young, she's immature, she doesn't know any better.
You took on the role, and that job comes with certain basic responsibilities. And one of the most basic is the responsibility to control yourself and comport yourself a certain way publicly so that you don't harm the project, thereby harm all the hundreds of other people who are working.
Joe couldn't wrap his head around it. On his podcast, he broke it down in typical Rogan fashion, raw, honest, and a little stunned. She had everything, he said, everything, and she just kept pushing people away. He wasn't being cruel, he wasn't trying to be mean, but he was being real. Watching Rachel's collapse wasn't entertaining, it was frustrating because it proved something he'd been saying for years. When Hollywood stops respecting the audience leaves. He brought up the now infamous Snow White interviews. Joe was visibly annoyed as he recounted Rachel's comments, especially the part where she called the prince a stalker. "You're playing a fairy tale princess," he said. "It's not a political debate. It's a story that people love." And that's where Joe really started to dig in. Not because of what Rachel said in isolation, but because of what it represented. To him, it wasn't just Rachel rewriting a Disney classic. It was Hollywood, again, lecturing instead of entertaining. And Rachel, in his eyes, had become the poster child for that approach.
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
So no prince or a different kind of prince?
We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story just because, like, we cast a guy in the movie.
Joe has always respected actors who stay grounded. He's praised people like Keanu Reeves and Chris Pratt for being humble and connected to their fans. So when someone like Rachel Zegler comes along, someone who seems to think the role of Snow White is beneath her, Joe doesn't hold back. He questioned why anyone would sign on to play a role in a beloved franchise and then spend months tearing it down. If you hate the character so much, he said, why take the job? It's a fair question, and one that more people started asking after Joe brought it up. Rachel didn't just critique the story. She acted like she was above it, as if playing Snow White was some outdated relic that needed to be fixed by her personal ideology. Joe wasn't the only one who noticed, but he was definitely one of the few willing to say it publicly. As he continued talking, Joe brought up the reaction from fans. He read headlines and Reddit threads live on the podcast showing just how wide the backlash had become. It wasn't a political group or a single demographic. It was a broad group of everyday people who felt insulted. Joe summed it up perfectly. People don't like being talked down to. They don't like feeling like they're being corrected every time they want to enjoy something.
Focused on becoming the leader that her father tells her that she can be. And she's really trying to find the courage to stand up to the evil queen and how to find her own agency and rule a kingdom. And she meets so many incredible people along the way. And maybe she finds love, maybe she finds friendship, but really what's important is that she finds her own voice. Jeff and Amy were reading lines. And then our director, Mark Webb, on Zoom was like, you know, and then Dopey's gonna look at you and whistle. And I took a pause and realized what I was auditioning for. And then it became like, I will elbow everyone out of the way to play the part. But it was very sweet. And it was a very short audition process for me.
Then came the Broadway debacle. When Joe found out that Rachel's Evita performance had ticket prices dropped to $0, his jaw almost hit the floor. $0, he said, laughing in disbelief. That's not just bad, it's historic. But he didn't laugh because he hated Rachel. He laughed because of how far the situation had spiraled. How does someone go from a Spielberg film and a Golden Globe to performing for free in less than 3 years? Joe's take on the balcony stunt was even more brutal. You've got people paying hundreds of dollars to see a show and you're out there singing to the people in the street, he said. What are you doing? That's not performance art, that's just bad judgment. Joe didn't hold back on that one. He called it disrespectful to the audience and completely out of touch. And that's the theme he kept returning to again and again, Rachel's disconnect from reality. One of the most striking parts of Joe's commentary was how he framed Rachel's fall as self-inflicted. There was no scandal, no crime, no mistreatment, just words. Lots and lots of words. And not the kind that inspire or entertain, the kind that divide, the kind that make fans feel like they're not welcome, the kind that turn celebration into controversy. Joe also called out the hypocrisy. You can't work for Disney, sell magic and nostalgia, and then go out and mock everything Disney stands for, he said. That's not bravery, that's bad branding. For someone who's built a career off authenticity, Joe couldn't understand how someone could be so dismissive of the fans that made her famous.
Everyone on West Side Story has so much stuff. Ariana DeBose has like a poster from the set. I have nothing.
That's amazing.
I have nothing.
You have
from my
memories.
first movie. I do. I have memories. I got a boyfriend out of it.
Like, that's a lot.
You got the boyfriend.
You took something from the set.
Yeah, I got a boyfriend. I got a best friend.
Yeah.
I have to pretend like, oh God, well, crazy that we're in front of this.
Wait, how often are you in line for the Snow White ride?
I'm a narcissist. I don't know. It's always like my publicist Ashton was with me the last time it happened, and I was like, God, I hope no one, because every time they come up to me, I'm always online for this freaking ride. Difficult question. Scar, love Scar, because that's like some pure evil. Like he really, really kills that guy. He kills Mufasa. That's crazy. Claude Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame, because it's really nasty because it's about like very real things. And then Hades from Hercules.
He also questioned why no one in Rachel's circle stepped in. Where were the managers, the publicists? Somebody should have pulled her aside and said, hey, maybe don't insult the audience every time you do an interview. Joe's theory, Hollywood has become so afraid of speaking honestly that they just let her run wild, hoping things would blow over. But they didn't. They got worse. As Rachel continued to make headlines for all the wrong reasons, Joe predicted exactly what was going to happen next. And he was right. Studios started testing trailers without her name. Disney removed her from merch. Theaters stopped renewing the show. And the internet, once divided, became united in one strange way. Almost nobody was defending her anymore. What shocked Joe the most was how avoidable it all was. He kept circling back to that. She didn't have to change the world, he said. She just had to be likable. Just show up, say thank you, and do your job. That's it. Not every role has to be a revolution. Sometimes people just want to see Snow White sing with animals and fall in love with a prince. And according to Joe, that's okay. He wasn't saying Rachel had to be fake. He wasn't saying she shouldn't have opinions. But there's a time and place. And the red carpet for a children's movie isn't the place for lectures on political theory. The balcony of a Broadway theater isn't the place to snub your paying fans. And Instagram isn't the place to declare war on half the country.
And singing all week, how is Snow White going? You're starring in Snow White, the new version. How's it going?
It's going really, really well. We're having so much fun on set. It's so magical. And every day I'm just pinching myself that I'm a freaking Disney princess. It's so stupid. Fun fact, I didn't get to watch it. I didn't see it. I have no idea what everybody was reacting to, but I saw the logo and I got really emotional. I also heard everybody like screaming and I got really excited, which means they must have liked it. But I know how I felt making it, and so hearing everybody's reception of it being so excited and screaming and cheering is so, it just fills your heart with such gratitude. Really, it does. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. Like, I'm being so serious. I watched it once and then I went on the ride in Disney World, which was called Snow White's Scary Adventures. Doesn't sound like something a little kid would like. Was terrified of it. Never revisited Snow White again. So I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years.
Joe also brought up how her story is a warning to other rising stars. This is what happens when your ego gets louder than your work, he said. Hollywood will smile at you, take a photo, and then never call you again. And that's what makes the Rachel Zegler situation so fascinating to someone like Joe. It's not just about her, it's about the bigger message. The disconnect between celebrities and real people, the refusal to read the room, the arrogance that turns potential into regret. Joe's podcast episode went viral. Clips were shared across social media, comments poured in, most agreeing with his points, some adding their own. It wasn't a takedown, it was a wake-up call. And as the episode circulated, more people started viewing Rachel's actions in a new light. Not as brave statements, but as examples of what not to do. In the weeks that followed, Rachel remained mostly silent, but her silence didn't help. It only amplified the noise Joe had spotlighted. The silence from studios, from collaborators, and even from fans spoke volumes. Joe predicted she'd go into what he called Hollywood timeout, not officially canceled, but quietly sidelined until the buzz faded. And judging by the projects that kept rolling out without her, he was spot on again. He even speculated on what it would take for Rachel to recover. She'd have to completely rebrand, he said. Drop the lectures, drop the attitude, show some gratitude, maybe disappear for a while, then come back with humility. But even Joe wasn't sure that was possible. Some people get it too late, he said. They wait until the whole thing crashes before they realize what they had. The irony, Joe noted, is that Rachel is actually talented. She can sing, she can act. That's what makes it so frustrating. But talent alone isn't enough. Not in today's world. People want more than just performance. They want connection. And Rachel, despite all her gifts, never figured that out. As the conversation wrapped up, Joe made one final point that stuck with a lot of viewers. Hollywood isn't punishing her, he said. They're just done, and that's worse. Because when they're done, there's no big announcement, no press release. They just stop calling, and the silence becomes permanent. And that, Joe said, was the real tragedy. Not the lost roles, not the social media backlash, but the fact that someone with so much potential could push it all away and not even realize it until it was too late. Rachel Zegler's fall isn't just a Hollywood story, it's a cultural one. A lesson in ego, a cautionary tale about what happens when the spotlight becomes a soapbox and the audience stops clapping. Joe Rogan didn't destroy her career, the critics didn't cancel her, the audience didn't abandon her out of nowhere. She pushed people away, one interview, one post, one misjudged moment at a time. And as Joe said, when you spend more time preaching than performing, the stage eventually empties out. As the Rachel Zegler conversation continued to ripple across Joe Rogan's audience, what began as a frustrated observation quickly turned into a cultural post-mortem. Joe wasn't just reacting anymore, he was dissecting. Rachel's fall from grace became the perfect case study for how modern celebrity culture can completely unravel when authenticity is replaced with arrogance and messaging becomes more important than the performance itself. In another episode of the podcast, Joe brought the topic back up during a segment about public relations disasters. His guest that day was equally stunned by the collapse of Rachel's public image. They didn't spend time nitpicking her movies or debating her talent. Instead, they focused on the fact that Rachel seemed genuinely unaware of the storm she had created. It's like watching someone set their own house on fire and then ask why it's so hot, Joe remarked, shaking his head. Joe zeroed in on Rachel's inability to read the room. He pointed out how so many of her interviews came off as completely detached from the general public's mood. When people wanted to enjoy a fun Disney reboot or support Broadway theater, Rachel brought political baggage. When fans expected charm, they got scolding. And when criticism came her way, instead of learning or adjusting, she doubled down with sarcasm and superiority. That, according to Joe, was the nail in the coffin. One segment that really stuck with listeners was when Joe dug into the idea of fan trust. He explained that once fans stop feeling seen or respected, it's almost impossible to win them back. People invest in performers emotionally, he said. When someone makes you feel like your support doesn't matter, or worse, that it's unwanted, you're gone. That's it. You're not going to buy the tickets, not going to stream the movie, not going to tell your friends about it. This led into a larger conversation about the entertainment industry's disconnect with everyday people. Joe pointed out that Rachel's behavior reflected a growing problem in Hollywood, where actors seem more interested in preaching than connecting. It's like the whole system is creating performers who don't want to perform, he said. They want to lecture. They want to prove how evolved they are, but nobody comes to the movies to be lectured. They come to escape, to feel something, to be entertained. Joe referenced several older stars who managed to maintain long, successful careers because they never forgot who they were entertaining. He compared Rachel's attitude to that of someone like Robin Williams, who made people feel joy regardless of politics or personal beliefs. Robin Williams didn't tell you how to think, Joe said. He made you laugh. He made you cry. And because of that, everyone loved him. That's what Rachel doesn't get. Joe's audience began to share their own thoughts. Comments poured in from fans who once rooted for Rachel but had been slowly turned off by her tone. Many said they felt talked down to or replaced by a new kind of star who no longer wanted their approval. Others said they'd still support her if she owned up to her missteps and simply showed a little humility. But as Joe put it, the window for that kind of comeback doesn't stay open forever. Eventually, people stop caring. Later on, Joe examined the way Rachel handled the press tour for Shazam, Fury of the Gods. Instead of treating the film like a fun opportunity, she sarcastically stated she only took the role because she needed a job. That was her moment to turn the tide, Joe said. She could have played it cool, been grateful, had some fun with it, but instead, she came off like she didn't even want to be there. It was another example, Joe explained, of how Rachel continuously sabotaged her own opportunities with an attitude problem. Joe even mentioned how other celebrities responded to the backlash. While most stayed quiet, a few made subtle comments in interviews, never naming Rachel directly, but clearly referencing her behavior. One veteran actor said in a roundtable, "Young actors today sometimes forget that you're hired to serve the story, not to rewrite it." Joe highlighted that quote as one of the most accurate summaries of the entire Rachel Zegler situation. Eventually, Joe expanded the discussion to talk about how studios were now rethinking how they cast young talent. He mentioned how marketing teams are now forced to run 2 sets of trailers, one with certain actors featured and one without, just to see which performs better online. In Rachel's case, the trailers without her name reportedly did better. That's how much people didn't want to see her, Joe said. They tested it and the version without her in it literally performed better. That's brutal. He also brought up the shift in Disney's strategy. According to reports, the studio quietly pulled Rachel from promotional materials and even considered replacing her in certain scenes. When the company that cast you as a princess starts pretending you're not in the movie, That's not subtle, Joe said. That's exile. They're not just disappointed. They're done. Joe also commented on how Hollywood had stopped rallying to her defense. In the early days of Backlash, there were efforts to explain or excuse her behavior, but now even that support had dried up. PR experts weren't stepping forward, fellow actors weren't offering encouragement, awards shows weren't inviting her. She wasn't being blacklisted in a formal sense. She was just being phased out, and to Joe, that was the harshest punishment of all. One particularly sharp observation Joe made was about Rachel's online presence. Despite the growing criticism, she continued posting content that only fueled the fire. From tone-deaf humor to divisive political statements, her social media became a running list of what not to do as a public figure. She's got this gift, Joe said, for turning every possible good moment into a PR disaster. He also noticed how even her attempts at vulnerability were met with skepticism. When Rachel cried on stage during an Evita performance, the internet didn't rally around her. Instead, people accused her of fake emotion and manipulation. She lost the benefit of the doubt, Joe said. When you burn enough bridges, even your real tears don't land. People just assume you're acting. Joe's guest chimed in, agreeing that Rachel's actions had left no room for redemption unless she drastically changed course. The problem isn't just what she said, the guest noted. It's that she keeps doing it. There's no growth, no learning curve, just the same mistakes over and over. Joe reflected on that for a moment and added, you know what people respect? Growth. You can mess up, everyone does, but if you own it, apologize, and grow, they'll forgive you. Rachel never did that. She never even tried. And that's where the conversation hit its emotional core. It wasn't about destroying Rachel or tearing her down. It was about showing what happens when someone refuses to grow. They wrapped up the segment by discussing the future. Would Rachel ever recover? Joe wasn't sure. Maybe, he said, if she disappears for a while, humbles herself, and comes back with a completely different attitude, maybe. But it's a long shot now, because the damage isn't just to her brand. It's to how people feel when they see her name. Joe emphasized that in today's world, celebrities are more than their roles. They represent something to the public. When that representation becomes toxic, people tune out. Rachel Zegler, once a rising star, had become a symbol of everything fans were growing tired of: arrogance, detachment, and a refusal to connect. And in a final moment of clarity, Joe looked at the camera and said, "Let this be a lesson. You can be the most talented person in the world, but if people can't stand you, they won't show up. Respect your fans, respect your role, or the spotlight will move on without you." And just like that, the Joe Rogan podcast had captured what the rest of the media refused to say out loud. Rachel Zegler didn't get canceled. She got tuned out. And as Joe made clear, that silence, that's worse than any headline.